So yes, I'm Patrick Tucker. I'm with Defense One. I'm the technology editor there. With me is Mary Miller from the Pentagon, where she oversees a wide variety of science and technology initiatives under WELLBY. Raj Shah, who is the new director of the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. Lisa Swain, who is with JIDO. It got changed very recently. This is the group that looks at improvised threats that our soldiers face, that our partner militaries face out in the world. It was originally stood up to counter IEDs, but there's a lot of definitions of what that can mean now. So they are tasked with improvised threats, IEDs, and Eric Daimler, White House Technology Fellow, futurist as well, a great thinker on technology, on innovation. Wears a lot of hats, speaks on behalf of Silicon Valley to the extent that one can, because they are many rich cats. So we are talking today about technology dominance in the year 2030, and this is an eclectic panel for a reason, because in order to talk about what that means, we have to talk about the core technology trends today, how the Defense Department and the national security establishment can capture those trends, how they can respond to them, how today's trends become tomorrow's threats, which become the day after opportunities. Ms. Miller can speak about big Defense Department and also core technologies. She's an engineer by training, which is so important to have. But we're also going to talk about DIUX. This is their first sort of public say hi since a big reorganization. And that, as I hope most of you know, is Silicon Valley's kind of Defense Department partnership. So it's really DoD's fort in the Valley, if you want to get super mill about it. But it's also a partnership kind of hub where the Defense Department reaches out to innovators that aren't sort of traditional Defense Department players, sees what they can bring in to the broader endeavor. And we're also going to talk about today's threat landscape and tomorrow's threat landscape technologically, because Ms. Swain has some fantastic practical experience, can speak to the battlefield as it exists right now, and how the process of looking at threats as they emerge literally from tunnels, from the fields of Iraq and Syria, how to think about how technology creates the next generation of threats. So let's just sort of dive right in. First of all, Ms. Miller, I'm going to ask everybody to go down the line and introduce themselves very briefly, and then we're going to talk about the future of technology today, 10, 20, 30 years in the future. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Obviously, technology is something I've had a historical interest in. I am the Principal Deputy of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. It's a very long title. What it comes down to is I am the advocate for the Department of Defense's technology development, all of our 63 DoD laboratories, and the work that is done by our scientists and engineers there. We think the laboratories are extremely important because our experts, our scientists and engineers within our DoD laboratories are the ones that understand and interpret what technology will do in the future and how it will apply to our nation's security. So part of our function is that translation function, what's being done commercially, that Raj Shah will talk a little bit about how we access that, and then how we can apply it for the Department of Defense, because we are uniquely positioned not to only understand technology, but also the environment in which we are going to use it and the military context itself. So we understand the threats and what we're going to be facing. So that allows us this better view of what we need to do for our warfighters. I also have other things in my job jar, but in the context of this discussion, we'll stick on the technology part, which is truly an opportunity for the nation.
Hi everyone, thanks Patrick. My name is Raj Shah. I have the pleasure of leading the team that comprises the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. We Our mission is to interface and leverage commercial technologies, companies that normally don't do business with the Department of Defense, and help accelerate that technology innovation into the hands of our warfighters. We've got offices in California, Boston, a presence in Austin, and reservists now throughout the nation. So we're actually very much a continental view in terms of where we access it. But again, our role is to help our customers, which are the Army, the Navy, the COCOMs, other agencies, help them take advantage of all the investment that the private sector is doing for their own needs and the heavy amounts of dollars they're putting in towards new technologies such as autonomy and artificial intelligence, and get that technology to our warfighters as fast as we can.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Swan. As Patrick said, I'm with the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organization, or agency, a few months ago, and before that, JIEDO, Joint IED Defeat Organization. So today, we are part of DITRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. But I give you that little bit of history because I think it's important to the discussion as we talk about technology dominance in 2030. I think there's a lot we can learn by looking back. And so I will say this past Monday was the 13th anniversary of the first U.S. person killed from an IED in Afghanistan. We'll try this one.
Technology.
Not through that one. All right, we'll do this one. As I was saying, 13 years ago this past Monday, the first U.S. person was killed by an IED in Afghanistan. That was prior to my organization standing up, but as many of you recall, IEDs quickly became a problem. A person was killed, and then more and more, and soldiers, sailors, airmen, they were being injured in tremendous numbers. And so my organization was stood up as the Joint IED Defeat Task Force, and we've evolved since then. Why does that matter? Well, as we look forward, so 2030, about 13 years from now, that's about 13 years ago, what have we learned in that 13 years that will help us project where we need to be? And I'm sure we'll talk some specific technologies, but I would just hit a couple of themes from what we've learned. One is the IED wasn't new. It hadn't been used against us in that way before, but it was, explosive technologies, explosive charges have been used forever. It was just used differently, and it has continued to evolve from 2013, 13 years ago, so 2003, thank you, math in public, 2003, until now. We've seen lots of iterations. And so one of the things as we look forward is I think we can expect that to continue, and we have to be prepared to adapt and be flexible, not only for what we know today and what we know 5 years from now, but how that's going to be used in a completely different manner 5 years from there. So I'll stop with that for the moment and pass it on.
Well, it's good to be here, Patrick. Thank you for having me. I am Eric Daimler. I've spent really the last 20, 30 years at the intersection of academia and industry, working as a computer science professor, spending time at University of Washington, Seattle, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, where I was a computer science faculty, and working as a professional venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. I now spending this year as a sort of tour of duty, working closely with many government agencies, fortunately including the White House, OSTP, on what's a fortunate time to be refreshing our nation's commitment to robotics and artificial intelligence. So this year we had a refresh, a 5-year refresh of our National Robotics Initiative. We reintroduced our National AI R&D plan. We introduced some subcommittees to the OSTP on robotics and AI. I've been fortunate to be part of all those work streams. I can say something about the difficulty of the task in front of us and trying to define technology dominance in 2030. As if we think back to 2003, I was looking this up. I had a Motorola Razr.
Sweet.
Yeah, and you would never have predicted one of these in 2016. 13 years. It's really a difficulty of predicting this. And maybe we could have predicted something like this, but what I would have been completely unable to do would have been to give advice to my nephew that it would have been he has a good job prospect in being an app developer.
Yeah.
And that the app economy would be as large as it is. I have no concept of that.
Yeah.
So that presents some difficulty in our task and in the military's task and America's task in defining what technology will be around in 2030 that we need to master to defend ourselves.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So this is who we've got. We're going to talk about big Defense Department, their future of technology. We can talk about Silicon Valley and the future that they're seeing right now and the trends that are shaping that. We can talk about troops on the front lines, technology that's being used against them, how to get technology to them in a way that's fast and rapid, and what that means in terms of technology dominance today. And then all of it comes together in a conceptual framework for what can academia do, what can venture capitalism do, what does the history teach us about the future of technological innovation. So big impetus for this panel is this idea of the third offset, which suggests that we can create some technology that's going to offset technological gains that peer nations might confront us with in some way or another in the next 20 years. The first two offsets assured us a certain amount of dominance, second strike nuclear deterrence, stealth. And what we're noticing, though, is that the idea of having technological dominance through a single technology for 20 years seems impossible because technology isn't what it used to be. Information technology moves too quickly, it's too democratized. The Defense Department in the 50s, really up until through the 70s, was 2/3 of research and development. In science and technology, the commercial sector was the last third. Now those numbers have flipped. And so the trends are really with the private sector. And so that means that we have to rethink what dominance is, how long we can have it. So we're going to be going through a bunch of different iterations of dominant technologies before we get to 2030. So having said that, we'll start with you, Ms. Miller. When you look at those areas of technology that we can invest in now, that are going to produce something remarkable for us to give us incremental phases of dominance. We talked about a few of them: additive manufacturing, sort of 3D printing, advanced materials. This is a big DoD effort in creating advanced materials right now, including flexible electronics. Human augmentation. So think of anything science applied to optimizing human performance first for soldiers, and then perhaps for the entire DoD. And another one that we spend a lot of time talking about is synthetic biology, because there's enormous innovation going on in this space right now, and it's a very uncontrollable space. So how do you see all of those different technology areas leading what you do? How do we use what we have today to achieve dominance in them, and how long can we secure that dominance before it vanishes? That's a lot to think about. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not going to sit here today and tell you how long we will be able to hold technology dominance in any of these areas, because you quite rightly depicted the world is now fraught with globalized technology. We are not going to get a singular, often military-derived solution that will last for 20 or 30 years of dominance. We know that. The differential that we probably see coming is our ability to be faster than our adversaries to adapt technology for military applications and actually get it to the warfighter. Mm-hmm. That creates a whole other theme of discussion that we might choose to have. If you're talking about technologies that we believe will play a large role in the era of 2030, you ran down a list that we kind of batted around, but additive manufacturing is one that's been in process now. We've been doing it in commercial industry for quite a while. But what we see in the time frame of 2030 is the ability to do 3D printing of multiple materials together to get really low expensive electronics, batteries, medical devices that can be designed on one-offs or small production lots. You don't have to have a big production line and stick with that design for so long to make it pay off for you as the producer. That opens up a whole new space. And I will say that gives us lots of opportunity to get kind of that just-in-time needed capability that's specific to our requirements, but it also creates a threat because it is a venue where we can't track what the enemy is doing or making. So that creates, both opportunity and challenges. And frankly, technology tends to do that often. When we talk advanced materials, so up until April, I'll admit it, I've worked for the Army for 32 years. So I have a real strong bent on what the Army's mission sets are and what their concerns are. And materials is one of those areas that the Army sees as key and foundational. But it's true of all of the services, because as we look forward into the future, we now have an opportunity, and the basic research and science is showing us an opportunity to now make materials that we design at an atomic level to have the properties desired. So no longer are we settling for that material with the closest property that could kind of sort of fit what we want. We can actually design it in. What does that mean to us? That means we can start making materials that are more efficient as sensors, as batteries, more rugged as body armor, for example. We have put out research grants and supported academics that are working in areas of lightweight ceramic materials. Julia Greer out at Caltech has done a lightweight ceramic truss construct that is light enough to sit on the head of a puffed up dandelion and not crush it, but you can squash this thing and have it go down and come back up, pop forever, and you're not getting structural problems with it. It doesn't degrade. That's amazing. Truss work that gives you the structural stability and strength of the honeycomb, but without any of the structural problems. We're looking at materials that can luminesce when they have microfractures. So we have a better kind of condition-based maintenance. You can put it on something and see where that particular, be it a bridge strut, be it some piece of machinery, where it's now starting to fail. And you can fix it before that failure happens.
Are we going to have 3D printable electronics that, like a soldier and a fob on a hilltop, is going to be able to print complex computers similar to like a smartphone? Is that something that you see today as possible with miniaturization and additive manufacturing?
So the hesitation I have with that, saying yes to that question, is you said the soldier on a fob on a hill somewhere.
Right.
Because all of this 3D printing, it's not like the replicator machines in Star Trek.
Yeah.
It really requires feedstock. You have to have materials that you are going to use in the 3D printer, which creates a logistics trail itself. So while it might be easier to do overseas when we are in, like a larger area that you could set up some sort of capability to do that, I don't really see it on a small forward operating base.
Okay.
I will cede my time right now
Yes,
unless you want to go, because I've got
no.
more technologies we can talk
Well, we're going to open this up to the audience pretty soon, and I think they'll have a lot of questions about what you're going to 3D print for them in the not too distant future. But Raj, to you, this is DAOX's sort of big re-intro to the public since your reorg, and you've recently announced $36 million in new contracts out to Silicon Valley, 12 so far, right, and 15 in the pipeline. Give us a sense of what are the technologies you're seeing, and I say Silicon Valley, but that's so dumb. It's really all over the place. It's Boston. It's all over the place. Great innovators from across the United States. So pardon that shorthand. But what are you seeing from them that you were immediately like, this, we have to move in? And when you talk to them about the Defense Department, how to partner with them and how to do that in a way that's fast, what do you hear?
Right. I actually want to start with and tie it together with what you started, right? What is the third offset? Because I think the two are inextricably linked, right? So from my opinion, I agree with Mary. Third offset to me, it's not any one technology. They're rapidly changing. It is our ability to ingest those technologies in a very fast and agile method, right? If our procurement approach, if the length it takes to buy something is longer than the half-life of the technology, we'll never win, right? To Eric's point, right? Who here has an iPhone with more than a 3-week-old software update? I mean, anybody, right? It's constantly, there's a few, flip phones. For those without flip phones, right? It's constantly updated, right? But when we think about military hardware where software is the key differentiator, right? The update cycles are measured in months, if not years.
Right.
And so we have to think about a different way of how we ingest and try new things. So to tie that to DIX, right? So we've changed things around since May,
Right.
and there's sort of kind of 3 lessons learned that we've applied in order to better interface and attract non-traditional companies to come solve our problems. So the first one is all around speed,
Right.
agility, right? We have to work within their business cycle. A younger company or a company that's not sold to the department before, if it's going to take them 24 months, they may make a business decision that says, if they have really interesting technology, I'd rather go to a commercial company first,
Right.
and then I'll come to the government. Which, traditionally it's okay if we're buying again
Yeah.
a product we're going to keep for 50 years. But when something's changed so fast, we need to have access to those earlier companies.
Yeah.
So speed, right? So
Right.
the average time from meeting a company to those 12 contracts was
Yeah.
60 days. It was 59 to be exact.
Yeah.
Some were longer, some were shorter. But that's within the normal business case of a younger company, right?
Yeah.
So a clear, transparent, and efficient process is kind of the first lesson. The second lesson is to take orthogonal approaches, right? So we don't show up with requirements, here's exactly what we need. We start with problems, capability gaps, right? So we go to our customers and say, what are the key challenges? And then can we find a solution that's maybe not directly obvious, or certainly that company didn't think there was a
Yeah.
defense application.
So let me say that
Yeah.
when you talk about your customers, you're talking about COCOM, different
Yeah,
people all around the world.
exactly. Our customers are the COCOMs, agencies, the folks that are equipping the men and women in uniform.
What are some of the problems that they've said we need Silicon Valley's help with?
Sure. So let me give you 5 categories
Yeah.
of technology areas, and we have multiple projects which we can go into more detail around. But these are areas that were picked because they are ones where the commercial world, for their own purposes, have invested billions of dollars, right? So the 5 that we're focused on are autonomy, everything from UAVs, robot airplanes, submarines, sailboats, big data, so artificial intelligence, machine
Okay.
learning, commercial space, everywhere from launch to the platform to the sensors to the analytics on the data, networking and cybersecurity, of course, and then an emergence in biotechnology. These are all areas that, again, the Amazon is investing billions of dollars, Uber is investing $1 billion because they want to drive people around the world. They want to deliver a package via UAV. So can we apply those to our needs? That's been our focus.
All right. Now, Ms. Swan, I last saw you at a wonderful technology demonstration that JIDO puts together, where you go and you see all of the innovative things that they're developing to counter the IED threat. It really makes you feel connected to military technology. That just that day that you spend looking at, like, here's something that we figured out is a danger to our troops, here's the thing that we're using to counter it. So on this theme of, like, no one predicted that we'd be walking around with smartphones as powerful as the ones that we have today were a decade ago, I think that you can also say that no one predicted that you would be able to use flip phones as part of IEDs. But that's your job, kind of, to predict that sort of thing. So what are you seeing when you hear about, like, the speed of information technology? What does that mean for your job, understanding how that could threaten us?
So thank you for the lead in, because that leads me to say, I mean, we're created to support the warfighter on the field, to help them adapt to battlefield surprise, because this technological change happens all the time. And so we have to respond at the speed of war. People are dying based on new things every day. And as I said before, they don't necessarily have to be new technologies. They could just be technologies used differently. But that doesn't preclude new technologies. And I'll talk about counter-UAS for a minute. So everybody knows about unmanned aerial systems. You know, we're buying them. You can buy them at BJ's for $80. I think Costco maybe a little bit less. I look back, 20 years ago, my father-in-law was building radio-controlled model airplanes.
Right.
And he was using, that was kind of his passion, and he was using them to deliver candy to my children. And now we see them delivering packages, providing surveillance, and we're seeing our adversaries use them to deliver ordnance, to vector vehicle-borne IEDs, you name it, all those things, they're using that technology to their advantage. And it's off-the-shelf technology.
Right.
So part of what we have to do is get things out there quickly, because they're getting things quickly.
Yeah.
So we have the advantage, if you will, as opposed to a traditional DoD acquisition system. We have rapid acquisition authority. So we go through the same process,
Right.
hitting the same milestones, the same intent, but we're able to do that in a much more streamlined fashion, because we don't necessarily have to get the 100% solution.
Yeah.
You know, an 80% solution today may be all that's needed today.
Yeah.
And if you need the 100% and you're going to need lots of them and it's a long-term thing, then that goes into the formal acquisition process. But what we're able to do by partnering, and I think we're probably partnering with all the organizations represented here, as well as a ton of others, is we're able to reach out and quickly grab what's out there that's first thing we'll do is there anything out there that's good enough?
Right.
And then if not, is there something that's in the pipeline and we can speed that up? We can help move that faster and get it out there. Or if not, is there something else that we can help develop, find the right people to put on the problem?
So, Eric, I'm going to ask you your opinion on this, because this is what I've observed so far. The key, technology moves so fast that the idea of a single technology being dominant in 2030 is a fool's errand, but the way you stay ahead of that curve is through operating at the speed of the commercial sector of information technology. And the very fact that we had to create a DIUX, that we had to create a rapid innovation fund, sort of speaks to the fact that that's not the way the Defense Department actually normally does stuff, traditionally. So first, how does big DoD, how do we as a nation begin to move as fast as these innovative cells that we're creating now? And I would also love your take on how we can move a little bit faster in acquiring key technologies and actually moving them in the field outside of programs of record and bringing in non-traditional players too.
It's a really terrific question, and it really speaks to the theme, I think, around which all of us are really agreeing, which is that we can go to DoD briefings and at least I will often see these whiz-bang technologies that may happen out in the future, and it always is a little off for me, because the aphorism that we have in Silicon Valley is you just never want to be confusing a clear vision with a short time horizon. And when you think of the analogy we also agree with is in these little phones, if you continue the analogy, as Raj properly said, we have updates occurring every 45 days is actually the half-life on these apps. Right? And we develop new interrelated technologies that makes the half-life on all of our technology quite short.
Yeah.
Even though you'd think, hey, it's technology, I built it, it should last for quite some time.
Right.
So what we I think all agree is we say no whiz-bang technology, no matter how whiz-bang, will be the technology dominant force for America next year, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. It's really the sense that all of us need to be continually newbies in that. And Raj's and Secretary Carter's initiative is a wonderful way of trying to address that. I would say there's a few problems, and Raj does an admirable job trying to combat these. One is, first of all, to have addressed it in general, you'd say there's definitely something broken in the acquisition system if you had to invent a system to get around your system.
Yeah.
The second thing is the scale is way off.
Yeah.
Right, whatever Raj and his capable team is investing, you compare it to the threat we have, and quite literally, being out in Silicon Valley, that's the VC budget for the Chinese.
Yeah, right.
Chinese kind of writ large, whatever their interests are. That's their VC budget. It's not their defense budget. So the scale is just off.
Yeah.
And we have sufficiently beaten down our traditional defense suppliers, such that their cost plus model doesn't allow them to innovate.
Yeah.
And we are not really investing in the way we should be in talent. We spend a lot of money educating Raj, who represents really the best of a warfighter, right? That is elite level education for a fighter jet pilot. I don't know how many graduates we have of elite universities and elite programs inside our defense contractors or our military. The whole reward system is just not set up to do that.
So on this, do you feel like there's enough incentive for non-traditional players in place now to get involved in with DoD missions? And the incentive, I mean, the financial incentive is one thing, but on the one hand, DoD is like one customer. And so if you meet the demands of one big, kind of grumpy, kind of slow-moving customer, are you able to convince them that they're leaving money on the table instead of meeting like a broader group? What does DoD mean to a young innovator when they have the choice to reach an entire global market? Do you feel like they have to make a choice?
Well, I think that's the ideal outcome of our efforts, is that they don't have to make a choice. They look at the DoD just as they would any other customer. In fact, I would submit that many of the companies I have spoken with would actually love to work with the DoD. We have the most interesting and most complex problems, right? Like as an engineer, as much as it's fun to build a photo sharing app, right, to build something that is physical and going to save someone's life, it's a wonderfully exciting thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the business case has not come along with that. And so I think if we bring the business case where if you build a couple of feature sets that are unique for us, you're building a few that's unique for your Fortune 500 banks that you're selling to, and if we're a real customer, that's okay. And I think that's what long-term, the vision is that more folks will want to serve our needs. They'll grow our industrial base. There's a tremendous role for the traditional players as well in terms of sustainment and understanding of processes. And in fact, some of our projects, we've actually married the two. So one of our biggest projects, we have a traditional vendor that is building a platform, an airframe, and we have a small young startup.
How big is this airframe?
It's about the size of this table, perhaps.
Okay.
Right? It's unmanned, high-speed drone. A traditional, there's less of those being built in the valley, right? There's not as commercial need for that. Nor perhaps should there be. But the autonomy software, right? There's leaders and younger companies that are doing that. So we've married the two. So you're getting sort of the best of both sides, right? So it's not an either-or dichotomy. It's how do we bring together what each kind of sector is good at, in a speed that we get it out to the warfighter. And again, if it's the 80% solution now is okay, because even if we get it wrong or make some mistakes, you can learn from those mistakes now and iterate rather than wait 10 years and then determine you got to start over.
Right. So this autonomy thing is key because this is where the private sector can really help the United States government reach some of its objectives. This gets thrown around a lot when we're talking about the third offset, because we have these notions of it as being kind of this mysterious thing. It's just a math that's doing one thing. It's taking a lot of information and then making a series of calculations on the basis of that information. So the more information you get it, the more processing it's able to do on board, the more you can have it do. So this is really just a matter of you've got a platform with cameras, you've got a platform with different sensors, you give it the correct information, it's a ton of information about what it sees, about what its orders are, and then it does something, and this is supposed to be a huge leveraging sort of catapult technology for us. But there's nothing too mysterious about it. It's just that it's a function, it moves right now at the speed of information technology. The US can't succeed in achieving technology feats without huge input from Silicon Valley, without huge input from big players that are already working with information technology at the scale of the globe, right? So on this, when you hear these concerns that we're not moving super fast, and isn't it unfortunate we had to create whole subsystems of acquisition because the acquisition process doesn't work, what do you think?
I would say it's not unfortunate that we look for ways to improve the process. No process is ever going to be static. No process should ever be static. It should always be looking to improve because nobody's perfect. Right. So acknowledging that the standard acquisition process is perceived as very lengthy, in many cases it is. You cannot say it's going to come down to what Raj said. It is a mix of both that are going to be required. There are some technologies that can move very rapidly. There are some things that we want to last for an enduring amount of time.
Right.
You have deliberate acquisition and production of main systems, like, for example, look at helicopters that have been in the fleet, designed in the 70s and still there today and projected to be there for a good 20, 30 years beyond now.
Right.
Those are things that you probably didn't want to have just an 80% solution,
Yeah.
sort of get it right. You wanted to be very deliberative because those platforms will last a good long time. Now, everything on those platforms, I shouldn't say everything, lots of things on those platforms can be incrementally improved at a very rapid pace.
Right.
So we need to be very thoughtful about what are those long endurance things that need a deliberate thought and long time to actually achieve, and what are those things that we can do faster. I would tell you that there have been a number of things put in place, like DIUX, to try out how can we correct some of what we see as our own challenges with the length of time. One of the things that you've heard a lot coming out of the Department of Defense is we need to do this thing called prototyping. Why? Because what we find is we set out what our requirements are, and they are big requirements, to take on these challenging threats and challenges ahead of us. We set out these requirements and we think we know what we're going to get, and we're often surprised because technology and engineering will give you a solution that is bound by the laws of physics, and yet the people that wrote the requirements may not quite understand what they're asking for. And when they get it, they're like, that's not really what I wanted. So prototyping does a number of things for us. It allows our user to see what they're going to get and decide, is that what I really wanted? Does it have the functionality or too much functionality? What is it? It helps us drive down the technical risk, and it allows us to know that when we launch into a program of record, we know what we're going to ask for, which helps industry as well, so that they're not starting a program that then later gets canceled.
But can I push back on something you said, and pick up what Mary said? You said we're building sub-processes to get around the normal process. I wouldn't characterize it as such. I would characterize this at DIUX as a prototype. Right? Obviously, we're building prototypes of technology, but the organization and the processes itself is a prototype. So we're prototyping a new process that allows us to engage with different companies at a different rate of speed. If we're successful, the hope and the idea is that it begins to be adopted and scaled across the department. That doesn't mean DIUX gets huge. It means the techniques that we use are broadly available to all acquisition components of the department, and when used appropriately, it helps them. And then we can try other things, right? So rather than reform everything all at once, which is a difficult task, we're trying little things. Some will work, some may not work, but the ones that do will go further. And so, for example, we use an other transaction authority, a new one from the 2016 Defense Authorization Bill. Some of those have actually worked now, and there are now other folks in the department, because the authorities are not unique to us, they're department-wide, are now using that. We have training programs, there's been seminars that have been run by the Picatinny Arsenal, who does our contracting. So that's how I would characterize this, that it's constant experimentation beyond just technology, but process and culture.
Can I ask you, what is the budget of DIUX?
The 17 bill has us, for our R&D budget, $30 million.
Okay, so Kedar Pautry's here, who's created a calculator that actually tells you how much an F-35 costs. So that's how many F-35s is that? It seems a strange. Getting back to this point of whether we're actually scaling, because JIDO is also, your budget is it's
a lot less than it used to be.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is a question. Yeah. Do we feel like we're scaling resources to meet the promise of this prototype?
Well, I mean, again, I just would push back, right? I think it's a very, I want to say DC type, but very, bureaucratic view to view the importance of a program by its budget.
Okay.
And I would push back on that, because I think, again, we're prototyping.
Yeah.
If this process works, for some of the projects that we've done, it's still in work, so I can't go into too much detail. There are follow-ons that are multiples of what we put, 10x multiples of what we started, that is being run by others in the department. So I view that as a complete success, and I view that as scaling. It didn't necessarily all have to come through us first.
Yeah. Well, so, and on this, when DAOX sort of came out, a lot of us were writing about it like, this is going to be sort of like a cosmetic effort. This isn't, they're not super serious about this. It's going to tick off too many people. Ash Carter believes in DAOX so strongly. I had a conversation with him where he said I would have one in every city of the country if I could. This is so core to everything that he wants to do. So I take your point, and you are absolutely right. This is something that is really key to everything that he wants to do in the Department of Defense. How does that, and we're going to take questions here in a second, how does that exist this time next year? What are the core things that continue to exist this time next year?
Innovation and bringing the best technology to our men and women uniform is a nonpartisan issue. It transcedes and transpats different administrations. So I think that the need does not go away, the importance doesn't go away, and so I think that folks will look at the type of projects that we've done. They will hear from our customers now, right? That whose problems we're solving, because that's actually all that really matters in terms of the value. And so I think it's in the nation's interest for this type of prototyping activity to be around. Yeah.
All right, let's move to the audience. I'm sure you all have some questions. We've got one right over here from Flight Global. Is that Flight Global? Aviation Week now. Oh, sorry about that.
Hi, James Drew from Aviation Week. There is obviously been lots of pledges by the Trump campaign to build up the military. When you do these massive build-ups in the past, sometimes it comes at the expense of future-looking innovations and the laboratories and different other organisations that have to give up their share to pay for, more tanks, more troops, more aircraft. What's your advice to, I guess, the next administration when it comes to deciding on the size of the budgets of the laboratories and these innovative DIUX organisations?
Yeah, is Donald Trump a fan of basic science and research, as far as you can tell?
I would say that it's incumbent upon us to defend the value of the laboratories to the Department of Defense. We have not been asked yet, but when asked, we will provide what is the value and the long enduring need for our laboratories.
I'd say if the competitive advantage is us needing to adopt technology most quickly and not just do R&D early stage, I'd say do the things that have already demonstrated to be successful. Triple the budget of DARPA. Right? That is manifestly does good inside the military. It also has good receptivity out in the commercial sector for kickstarting industries, and it attracts world-class talent. The other thing I would do is I would increase the budget for wargaming. If what we're talking about with IEDs is an expression of surprise about how weapons are expressed in the battlefield. War games is how to get around that. DARPA, for all its benefits, actually has these competitions for some sort of technology capture the flag. But really, and as much as I would love for computer scientists to be the solution for our technology dominance, that really may come from material science. It really may come from other areas, and we probably need to back out those problems such that a policy expert can understand those challenges and participate in those war games as well as a computer scientist.
And I think that leveraging potentially commercial off-the-shelf technologies, which is so huge, everything you do, the monetary value of that is sort of self-evident, one hopes.
I would just say, I think, like most things, it's a question of balance. I mean, what you've heard here are lots of different things that are working in specific spaces, but none of them is the answer for all. I would say probably everything, I hesitate to say everything, but it's probably true. Everything that my organization does, we do in collaboration with others, because there is no one solution in technology, in approach. We do a lot of things through communities of action, because various partners have what it takes to get after specific problems, whether they're short-term or long-term. And sometimes that's technology, but sometimes it's also the right authorities, the right intellectual capital, the will to act. And so we have this host of partners and host of approaches, and I think that's got to be part of the answer for the future, that we stay flexible and so that we can adapt, but we keep in mind that everything has a place.
Yeah.
And we build in enough flexibility to be able to adapt, to use those various processes as needed.
Okay. Sydney, over here.
Thanks. Sydney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. One big theme of the third offset that we've touched upon here, but I'd love to ask you each to go into a bit more, is artificial intelligence. And that means not just killer robots, as much as we all love killer robots, but if they're played by Supper Cloud. But also decision aids, big data, things that may not actually be stomping around in the world, but are helping people make decisions. And I'm curious on both those fronts, the physical and the sort of cognitive assistance, what you all see as promising developments in AI, things that the commercial world is doing, and things that defense may need from AI that the commercial world won't do on its own.
So having done AI research, I can say that we should probably not think of AI the way we do of traditional weapons. The ID conversation is actually an excellent one for this. When we thought of nuclear weapons initially, we thought they would be deployed just as another tactical weapon. That's what we thought of them for quite some time. They ended up defining a new type of conflict. Right. AI probably needs to be thought of in that way. Cyber war needs to be probably thought of in that way. We think of addressing the problem about AI is applied to cyber warfare, either defense or offense. We had previously, and for good measure, looked about how to defend our technology infrastructure, our power grids. But we saw in recent news how little point solutions, whether it's through break-ins at the OPM or messing with our electoral system, can produce disruptive effects equal to battlefield war. On the particular part of AI, it's very good to be not thinking that is not the gee whiz bang technology, right? It's not the dominant technology. It will probably be the command and control infrastructure of the future. If I have the half-life of all of my technology, the phone, again being an example, changing every 45 days, that means I'm going to war as a commander with a variety of soldiers using a variety of weapons that actually were just updated 6 months ago. I can't possibly be effective doing that. And that's the most likely scenario where a type of artificial intelligence, pick your term, of sensing, planning, and acting on its own and learning from the experience. That's the most likely scenario where AI is going to be deployed.
Let me turn this to Raj. When you see what the military wants out of artificial intelligence, a lot of sort of queuing up different analysts to look at a particular grid and see if that's a target, that sort of thing, a lot of going through big data, and you see what the commercial world wants to do with artificial intelligence. Where do they meet and where do they dissect?
Well, I think if you're looking for artificial intelligence to help you with decision making and to garner insights from complex data, it's actually not that much different. Right? I think the technologies that Amazon uses to recommend you a product when you're on their website are applicable to our needs. From my observations, again, 6 months in the job, is that this is again less around technology for us, but more around policy. So for AI and ML, machine learning, to be useful, you have to have access to the data.
Right.
That's what's important.
Right.
We have a very stovepipe system for data. We have classification challenges. We have legacy systems that don't talk to one another.
Yeah.
So step one is actually just get the data together, and then that'll unlock the rest of it. So I think that's actually the challenge. It's not the algorithms.
And that's a challenge that sort of, it sounds like it's one that is bigger for DoD than it is for the commercial world, because you drown if you were stovepiping your data, not sharing it to reach marketable insights at scale. We have a different group of people to respond to, so stovepiping is something we do perhaps a bit more reflexively. Okay, there's so many questions. You go ahead.
for the panel. I don't think I'll need that. I'll be okay.
I know, but I think we're recording.
Oh, okay.
It's all right.
So I'm Pete Spahn from the Defense Forensics Biometrics Agency, and my question to the panel is actually a two-part question. First, for my own understanding, is how much does DIUX collaborate with a DARPA-like capability? And the second part of the question, I think I will wait till after the response because it's going to be a little involved.
So how do we work with organizations like DARPA? Is that the question?
How much collaboration do you have with the DARPA?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of customers within the department. Right? We don't have our own problems, right? We're trying to solve other folks' problems. And where there are instances that a unique approach or outreach to the commercial, non-traditional world is helpful, then that's where we play a role. We're also, I think, a little bit more near-term than future-looking. Right? I would almost say we're like -2 to 2 years in terms of the technology we're looking at. So, DARPA is very good at some of the longer-range things, which we candidly, aren't equipped for. We don't have the basic researchers and scientists. That's not our mission.
Okay, so the second part of the question is, I recently sat through a presentation in which 5 groups presented basically what I considered the same technology with just different focus areas. So my question is for the panel, how do you think that we can kind of come together to where we're not getting 10 or 15 submissions of the exact same technology, but more or less using the specific specialties that each company brings together to make one very fantastic product at a more rapid pace than maybe a joint urgent need that for the field takes 2 to 5 years to get into the soldier's hands.
Yeah, so cutting down redundancy, I guess. Sort of.
Well, I'll start from the cutting down redundancy across the corporate laboratories. Within the Department of Defense at the OSD level, we set up what we call communities of interest in cross-cutting technical areas that kind of covered all the services and the agency needs and interest areas that are getting at what we see as military Department of Defense capability gaps. One of the things that has come out of it, one is a really good dialogue at the subject matter expert level, but an understanding of how every service is really tackling their part of that joint fight capability gap. And where we saw there was like investments in certain areas, they tended to not be like at the top level, we're investing in, let's pick sensor technology. Sounds very similar, but when you look at the applicability to their service, it wasn't really quite the same. As you went down layers into the lower, earlier technology, there were similarities, and they kind of self-organized among the services and said, okay, we all have an interest to understand this technology landscape. I'm going to take my resources that were over here with you, and I'm going to let you take the lead on that, and I'm moving them over and covering a new area that we hadn't looked at before. So that we're trying to broaden our coverage of opportunities to address those capability gaps. Where you got a little sticky, and I'm not going to talk to, is how do we get industry to partner together? That gets a very dynamic situation, and I'll stick with technology.
Okay, so I think we're at the last question. Are we? Oh, we're done, we're over. Well, please join me in thanking our panel for sharing their insights with us today.
So we've invited Ben here today. He's a fellow and director of the Technology and National Security Program at CNAS. And he is publishing very shortly a very appropriate report to follow on this conversation that we just heard from our panel. It's a special report entitled A Strategy for Technology Advantage. And we just spent some time here listening to a panel of experts talk to us about technological advantage and the future of technology. So as soon as he gets his mic on, I'm going to ask him to just give us a little background on what he does, his role at CNAS, And then by way of background, there was a report that was published in 2014, a precursor to the one that is coming out shortly, correct? And I thought he could give us some background on that. Extremely appropriate to this session's title.
Thanks. Well, nice to see you all. I run the Technology and National Security Program at the Center for New American Security, and I look at the relationship between strategy, technology, and business as those three aspects relate to national security. What we are increasingly seeing is a misalignment between those three aspects, and it's that underlying challenge that is in part driving our loss of technological advantage. We did a report a couple of years ago called Creative Disruption, where we looked at fairly well understood trends, many of which we've heard discussed this morning, in terms of the democratization of technology, the change in our geostrategic environments, and then unfortunately the lack of change on the Department of Defense, and based on that, the general lack of change on the part of the defense industry. And we forecast the impending challenges associated with that. I would characterize the report as pessimistic. We did not have a positive outlook on what was going to happen. And so two years later, we felt it was time to probably offer a positive vision for how to address those endemic challenges that we're all facing.
And this report's going to be released in December, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so given what the initial report said, what were we looking to do with this second iteration? What was the outcome that you were hoping for? Can you give us
Sure.
a foresight there?
I think we've seen in the last 2 years an incredibly strong focus from leaders in the Pentagon, especially the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, with the third offset strategy and all of these innovation initiatives, new offices, the work that Raj and his team are doing. We've seen a strong leadership from the SASC and the HASC in the 2016 and 2017 NDAAs trying to address these challenges. So I think that we have the arguments that I was making 2 years ago that were somewhat sort of heretical then are sort of well understood now. The question is, what do we do? We've got a change of administration. We've got a president-elect who said that he intends to invest more heavily in military capability. What is that going to look like? All of these great things that we've seen in the last 2 years are impermanent. As much as I would hate for the DIUX to go away, I think it's been an important innovation, that could go away in a second. Other transactional authorities, all these kind of things could go away. And it would be very unfortunate if we see a new administration come in and focus on purchasing the best military from the 1980s that money could buy. We would not want to see that happen. So we've got a real opportunity to invest in the future, and we want to see that done. And not just to buy new things, but to develop a new approach for how we generate military technical advantage.
So we invited Ben here to share with us just a few of the highlights before the report actually comes out. And in light of the conversation we just heard, it seems there's a need for this. There are a lot of things that they're trying. So what does the report reveal in terms of the opportunity that you just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think part of this is understanding the true nature of the problem. Often this debate gets wrapped up in terms of acquisition reform, which first off is incredibly boring. You put those two words together, I want to fall asleep. It's really important and we need to do it, but it's not the only challenge. From my perspective, what I see is a misalignment between our strategic needs, available technology, and the business models we use to marry those two things up. And just to be clear about what I mean, our current approach to generating military technical advantage goes something like this. We understand a clear, directive, strategic threat. Most notably, we saw this with the Soviet Union. You understand that you need to do something about that. And from that need, you can derive requirements. It's going to take time to develop those requirements and the technology, but our adversary is going to take some time as well. The technologies that we would invest in are largely available through the defense industrial base, and in many instances, the United States has unique access to them. So then we can develop those out through the contractors, we can lock them in with export controls, and then those technologies will eventually filter out into the broader economy. That really worked incredibly well in the 1960s and the 1970s, arguably in the 80s. Today, none of those various elements are true. We face a variety of threats, none of them as existential as the Soviet Union, but we need to think about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, terrorism, cyber. They don't all require the same strategy or the same technologies. We have a much wider range of technologies that we need to invest in addition to the old ones. We need to keep thinking about nuclear capability, about conventional warfighting capability, but we also need to think about all the technologies that the previous panel discussed. And we don't have unique access to them. So if other people can get them, and so can we, our export controls regime doesn't make as much sense, and none of that entire structure is as neatly aligned as possible. So we think that we need to address that problem. And what we've tried to do is lay out a positive vision, a strategy for how to do that. We're not saying that it's 100% right, but the thing that I have not seen in Washington or anywhere else is an argument for what a good system would look like. I think we're pretty good at diagnosing the problem now. So we want to start saying what that would look like. Feel free to disagree with me, but I just wanted to start a conversation about that.
Well, you started out your comment saying that talking about acquisition reform is boring.
Yep.
But that seems to be the crux of the matter, right? So how do you accomplish this? I mean, how do you go about taking it from the workarounds that were just discussed to modifying it? Do you agree with Raj and what he said about prototypes?
I do. I absolutely agree. I think that we need to go further. So we argue for many things in this paper. The first thing we do is we say that we should have what we're calling an optionality strategy, so that the Department of Defense needs to invest in many more types of systems. So instead of just having one or two air superiority platforms, we should have several. We should have more than just the F-35 and the F-22 flying in the future. We should have lower cost systems in larger numbers. We should have more unmanned systems. And that diversity in the portfolio allows you to do many things. From a strategic perspective, it imposes an intelligence and an innovation burden on our adversary. Right now, our adversaries really just need to figure out, how do we counter the F-35? I would like to give them a much more complicated problem than that. In addition to that, it puts the basis of competition, it moves it away from the features of those sort of monoculture platforms that we have, and puts it into the human aspect of, do you have people who can develop concepts that take advantage of that diversity? And do you have commanders, joint force commanders, who can command a force of that diversity and complexity? No other nation on earth is going to have the human capital to execute this, or the diverse force to do it. We think that's a much better basis for competition. And then you can use that strategic approach to drive change inside the system. And we have thoughts on how to change inside the system as well.
Do you have any examples, or can you point to other global industries, that have made this kind of change to their acquisition process? And I guess what I'm looking to get at is, are there lessons here that can be derived from other industries to help the defense community get there?
I don't think so in terms of the overarching strategy. The United States Department of Defense has unique problems, and we need unique strategic solutions to that. That said, there are many things that we can learn in terms of how to build and develop systems. I think the earlier conversation about additive manufacturing was a very interesting one. 3D printing itself, great, I can print something that's interesting. But if you put all of the technologies together, and I wrote a paper on this a couple of years ago, if you take computer automated design, automated assembly, and think about that for unmanned aircraft systems, you would actually come up with a completely different force sizing construct. You can develop things much more quickly. You can develop many different variations. Rather than upgrade systems, you can just build new systems. And every time you upgrade something or change something, you can change the software across the entire fleet. You don't need to worry as much about training because the systems already know how to fly themselves. And you can use technologies and acquisition or industrial approaches from other industries in the defense space, but we need to make sure that we have unique military strategies on top of that. One of the challenges in an era where commercial technology is broadly available is that everyone has access to it. So if they're buying the same stuff or they have access to the same systems, where do we get our advantage? I would love to say that it's going to be based on our ability to speed the flow of that technology to the warfighter, but frankly, that's like the worst thing that we do. So I wouldn't want that to be the basis of our future strategy. That's why we think taking an approach of options will allow us to do that. And related to that, I think we need to have a more nuanced understanding of our industry policy and understand that we don't operate in one defense market. We actually operate in 4 markets. And I can cover those briefly
Yeah,
if you
because
like.
he had shared this with me when we spoke, and I found this interesting, so please share with the audience.
So right now we think about just the defense industry marketplace. I would argue that DoD actually acquires things in 4 different methods, and I'm going to cover the first, second, and fourth in order, and then I'll come back to the third one. The first is military unique systems with constrained competition. Aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines. There's not really a neat commercial analog to that, and it's going to be hard to drive competition just based on demand. The second category is military unique systems with viable competition. And this is the majority of what we do right now. We need a new air superiority fighter. We've got a system for that. Can it be better? Yes. Do we have a system that by and large functions? We do. The fourth category is purely commercial technology. Again, we have some systems. We have federal acquisition regulations for that. Could that system improve? Yes, but we have it. The third thing that we do not have is a system or a policy for military adapted commercial technology. And if you think about all of the conversation that we had on this earlier panel, all of those people are trying to solve the same problem. There's commercial technology out there. I can't just buy it off the shelf because the DoD can't absorb it. It needs to be adapted or ruggedized, or we need to train to it. We need concepts of operation. We need doctrine. We don't have a system for that. It falls in between FAR Part 12 and FAR Part 15, and we don't know what to do about that. So we need a policy that that addresses that. And frankly, I think we need an alternate acquisition pathway that values that and goes after it. So we advocate in this forthcoming report that the DoD creates a second, what we're calling an additional acquisition pathway to essentially compete with the primary system. Is that efficient? Probably not. Will it drive change? I think so. Either that system will succeed and will grow, or it will drive change within the current system. I don't care which way it comes out. We just need the ability to bring those capabilities in that manner, whether it's through the current system or an alternate approach.
Okay, so now we've actually run out of time, but I wanted to thank you, Ben, for coming. I would ask you to share with everybody here how they can get access to the report and dig in deeper to this issue. I think it married so well with the conversation before, and I think what we could really learn is what's in it for industry, right?
That's right. So the report comes out December 14th. We cover, obviously, the things that I just talked about today, but a big focus is what does all of this mean for industry, both the traditional defense industry and new commercial entities that we might seek to bring into the defense sphere. We need to get the right incentives so that our businesses can succeed, and in doing so can create military technical advantage. So the report will be online at cnas.org December 14, and we'll also host an event and those kind of things. Feel free to come along.
Thank you all very much. I believe we'll be meeting again in the main stage after a short break. Thank you so much for joining us.